welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be doing an end of year wrap up for 2020, and I'm just going to be talking about all the books that I read after my winter period, and so what I read in spring of last year and in December. So after the winter period last year, I read a total of 5 books, which is let's just say that's a pretty low amount to what my goal was in terms of reading for last year, but I guess, you know, life just happens and I get into a reading slump, and yeah, I guess my kind of reading isn't as efficient towards the end of the year. Is there ever going to be a year where I reach 50 books? It seems like it's been forever. Like, I've only reached that goal like once since I've gotten Goodreads. I don't know, in 2021 maybe I might set my goal as 50, but who knows, it might not work out that way. So I ended up finishing 5 books within, what is that, like 4 months? But I still read during those 4 months, so I gotta keep positive here. So without further ado, we'll get straight into the wrap up. The first book that I have here for you today is The Girl in Red by Christina Henry, and this is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling set in a post-apocalyptic world. This is the first book I finished during October, so I guess since August. Oh my gosh, I just realized after August I didn't finish anything during September. Oh well. Anyway, so this is the first book that I finished in October. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. I think I was expecting more from this book, even though I enjoyed it for the most part. It was an interesting ride. So this basically is set in a post-apocalyptic world where there was some sort of flu-like virus outbreak, which is quite fitting for our time. Right now, most of the population had died off, and so we're just following this girl, Red, and she's trying to get through this post-apocalyptic wasteland, trying to avoid like government officials because I don't know if the government is still around, but like, you know, the army and stuff are trying to gather leftover people who survived the virus and like take them to like quarantine camps and stuff. And then our main character doesn't want to go there because she thinks just putting a whole bunch of people together in like quarantine camps is just waiting for a disaster and an outbreak to occur again within those camps. So she's trying to completely avoid it. She's a survivalist, and she's trying to make her way to her grandmother's house because her grandmother lives kind of in the wilderness and like isolated from like civilization. So she's trying to make her way there, and she's like walking there, so it's like taking quite a while, and it's kind of like her journey from where she lived all the way to her grandmother's house. So it's kind of like a journey story, and you kind of follow 2 different timelines. So you're following her current timeline where she's making her way to her grandmother's house, and then you have a past timeline where you kind of find out how she got to her current state. Even though it's kind of got an interesting setting, I love post-apocalyptic books, but at the same time it wasn't like, there were parts of the story where it became kind of boring because nothing was really happening, and then you get flashbacks, but I don't know, I never really felt much. I don't know, I wasn't very invested in the character of Red. It was kind of like a boring post-apocalyptic world, and even though like sometimes there were intense moments throughout the story, after those intense moments kind of ended, I was kind of like bored again. So that's why I kind of felt meh about this book, even though I've heard a lot of good things about Christina Henry's like retelling books because they're usually like darker retellings. And this was no exception. This was, yeah, like parts of it got violent. It wasn't really a happy ending for a lot of the characters. Red is also a survivor, so she's very kind of brutal when it comes to like surviving. So yeah, there was that aspect which I liked, but overall it was kind of a little bit boring, even though it had a very interesting premise. And I think there were aspects that were kind of introduced, but there was no conclusive conclusion or closure to a lot of like ideas that were presented in the story. And so I felt a little bit let down by that, because there was a lot of things that were going on in the background where I wanted more information on it. But I mean, it's not a very long book by any means, so I guess there wasn't enough time to flesh out like this world. And also there were hints of like a bigger threat than just the virus and dying from the virus. Like it seemed like there were further like mutations of the virus, but Christina Henry didn't really elaborate or go into detail about that, so I was a little confused. Overall, I enjoyed the reading experience, but at times it got a little bit boring, and I guess it was just kind of an average read. But if you like the sound of a post-apocalyptic wasteland with a Little Red Riding Hood kind of retelling, this might be the one for you. I kind of enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite. The next book that I finished in October was Renegades by Marissa Meyer. If you know me, you know that I love the Lunar Chronicles so much. I know like it's hit and miss sometimes, but I personally really enjoy the Lunar Chronicles. So I don't know why it took me so long to pick up Renegades. I kind of wanted to pick this up because I ended up watching the second season of The Boys. If you didn't know, I love the show The Boys, and I even did like a season 2 kind of review discussion on it, which I'll link here if you're interested in watching it. This premise is kind of similar to The Boys-ish. It's kind of a mesh between The Boys and Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. You're following like a dual narrative. This is set in a world where heroes and supervillains exist amongst like civilization, and like the superheroes are obviously praised. They're like these celebrities in this world, and then you have like villainous characters who are shunned away by society. You kind of get the perspective of both sides. So one of the characters is from the hero side, one of the characters is from the villain side, and you're basically following one of the characters as she infiltrates her way into the hero's society. I don't know, like their kind of corporation. She's kind of going in there like a double agent, like she's pretending to be a hero, but she's actually like working for the villains. And then you have the other main character who is the son of one of like the big heroes of this, I don't know if you should say company or organization, but you have like the superstar heroes. He's the son of one of the big superheroes of this company. So it's kind of set in an interesting premise. I love Marissa Meyer. This was a very quick read, like so many things were happening, and you kind of felt for both sides, like for the heroes and for the villains. It was very conflicting for me to kind of root for which side. The two main characters are kind of you know, they get into a bit of a romantic sort of relationship. Like there are some tensions, but it's very subtle, I think, in the first book. Like it's not very much established, but there are hints that, you know, there is an attraction. I thought that it was a very fun read, and it's definitely not as dark as Steelheart. It was set in a very dark world. It was very like hopeless because all the heroes were like villainous, whilst in this one you see kind of both sides, and like the heroes, they're not always like clean cut and good. Most of the times there are gray areas for both sides. The superheroes, although to the outside world they seem like perfect and, you know, chivalrous and, you know, everything that represents a hero, but you do see flaws in the system, and in some of the heroes they do some questionable things, so they're not always that good. But then also the villains, they do villainous things, but then there are moments of heroic acts from the villainous side too, and you do feel very sorry for the villainous side because they're like really downtrodden by society. And so yeah, you kind of see both aspects, and I really enjoyed that aspect of Renegades because it was kind of like an interesting morale questioning, if you can call it that. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I did initially start reading the second book, but then I got distracted with other stories, so I will get to the sequel to this soon, or like continue on with the sequel. But regardless, I enjoyed it very much and I can't wait to read the sequel and just continue on with the trilogy. Anyway, love Marissa Meyer. It's definitely different from her previous series, but overall I enjoyed it. I did hear that the sequel was a little bit boring, so I'm a little bit scared to go into it, but I enjoyed Renegade so much that I'm very eager to continue on. Okay, so moving on to November, I picked up I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Oh my gosh, I've been wanting to read this book for so long. I guess I could thank like the movie adaptation for me wanting to read this, because again, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, and back in the days, I think like my senior years of high school, I was really into like post-apocalyptic stories, whether it be in movies, shows, or books. And so yeah, I remember watching I Am Legend, which by the way is so different from the book, but I really enjoyed that movie. Ever since I watched that in the cinemas back in the day when it was first released, I really wanted to read the book, even though I heard that it was very different. Yeah, it was very different. I ended up really liking I Am Legend. It was kind of like, it wasn't very plot heavy. It was more like character focused, because you're pretty much following this one guy, Robert Neville. Is it Robert Neville? Yeah. Pretty much he's living in a world where there is, you guessed it, a virus outbreak, and it pretty much turned civilization into vampires. So yeah, like he's been living in his little house for I don't know how many months or years, but he's been locked in there, and you have these vampires that come out during the nighttime trying to bother him, trying to get him to come out so they can feast on him. But you know, he's a survivalist. He's been surviving many months. It seems like it's been years maybe. It's interesting because in the movie, like the vampires, they were kind of like monstrous and they had like not really any personality really. But in this one, in the book, like the vampires, they're not like creatures. They're still retained personality, so they can talk. He states that they look human, but they're not like mindless creatures. That was not what I was expecting. I thought they were gonna be just like monstrous. Like I said, it was a character-driven story. It's rotated solely around this one guy. You definitely felt a sense of isolation because he's stuck in this town and he can't really go anywhere too far because he always needs to get back to his house before dark. It was unexpectedly emotional. I did not go into this book thinking that I would be moved in any way, but for some reason I was. There was a few moments in this book where I felt like, oof, like it got me, but like there was one specific moment with a dog and yeah, it broke me. I won't elaborate more than that, but it was so, yeah, maybe telling you that is a minor spoiler, but it broke me. I ended up really liking this book. I'm so glad that I finally picked it up after so many years of wanting to read it. It's a very short book, so if you were thinking about picking it up, I would say it's worth the read. It doesn't really elaborate too much on the world and what had happened. It kind of briefly mentions those sort of aspects, but it's mainly like character focus. It's kind of a almost depressing read. It's very isolating and sad and just like hopeless in a way. I do want to kind of reread it in the future. Maybe I'll do a book review. There probably was a few things that I missed as well in the story, so it's probably worth a reread just to delve into it a bit more in the themes and the messages of the book. But yeah, overall I really liked it. It had like an emotional pull for me at least, and yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's kind of hot today. I'm getting a little bit, dare I say, sweaty. Moving on to the next book that I picked up in November, which was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This is my first kind of book diving into the romance genre for the year of 2020. I kind of was in the mood to read something lighter and fluffier, and so I ended up picking up The Kiss Quotient. This book had a lot of popularity a few years back, and I kind of missed the hype train on this one, but it was still kind of circulating around. And I know a lot of booktubers this year, I mean not this year, during 2020, a lot of booktubers I've noticed started reading a lot of romance books. There was a huge kind of hype, I suppose. I was constantly kind of reminded of the romance genre. Too many months went by where I was reading like a lot of just sadder books, so I was like, no, I want to read something light and fluffy. It's springtime in Australia, that is. It's springtime, so I kind of was in the mood to read something a bit more light, and so I picked this one up, even though I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, just because there were aspects of the book where I was just like not really into, but I overall thought it was a cute read, and it was a very quick read. Maybe that's why a lot of people are reading romance these days, because it's just very quick and binge-worthy. I will be doing a book review for this one. I don't know if I would have posted it before this video or after this video, but either way, whenever I upload that video, I will link it somewhere in the screen here. Like I said, I had a very fun time reading this. It's basically following our main character, Stella Lane. She has a very mathematical kind of job. She makes algorithms and incorporates them into like shopping or something like that. It's confusing for my non-mathematical brain to comprehend. She also has Asperger's, and like I think the whole premise is kind of based around the fact that she's kind of like a workaholic, and her parents kind of want her to date and like, you know, have a romantic life aside from just working all the time. And so one day she decides to get professional help and hires a male escort to teach her the ways of I don't know what she was thinking. I guess she wanted to practice with physical intimacy, but also it turns out that she wants to know how to properly date people and, you know, have that process. So yeah, whilst the other character you're following is the guy Michael Fan, and he's like half Vietnamese, half white, and he's the male escort that she hires, and it's kind of like a dual narrative. You kind of get perspectives from both sides, even though it starts as sort of like this very professional relationship. It ends up turning not very professional at all and they end up obviously developing feelings for each other and whatnot. It's almost kind of insta-lovey. The initial like first 2 times they meet, it's kind of like, okay, it's not like immediate, but like it doesn't take long for these two to develop feelings for each other. It's just like, come on now, come on. This would not happen in real life. It's fictional, so we move past the very unrealistic aspect to this story. What more can I say? There isn't much of a plot line. It's basically these two just hanging out all the time. I was struggling to finish books before this one, but when I picked this book up, I'm pretty sure I finished it within like a few days, which was very impressive for me. So I would say that I definitely enjoyed it. If I wasn't enjoying it, I wouldn't finish it so quickly, right? It was just a quick read, but there wasn't much substance to the storyline itself. It was more like cute for like the romantic aspects of the story, and it's kind of cute to see like these two characters kind of get together. There was also a lot of like miscommunication, which I did not appreciate. Like, talk these things out, you know? There were moments where I was just like, not liking it, but overall it was enjoyable. It was cute, fluffy, and quick to read. And I don't know, if you're kind of in a reading slump and you want to dip your toes into the romance genre, I think this is a good one. I don't know how much more I can elaborate on this. I just had fun. It was a quick read. I recommend it, even though it wasn't the best read. You know, there were aspects of the book where I'm just like, it could have been done a little bit better. It's definitely not making my life feel any less lonely. Moving on, the one and only book that I finished in December, which was Night of the Dragon by Julie Kagawa. This is the 3rd and final book of the Shadow of the Fox trilogy, and I very much enjoyed this. I was a little bit skeptical because the 3rd and final book was so short compared to the other 2. There were a lot of like things left hanging from the second book, and I was just like, okay, how are we gonna conclude? I was very much concerned for my characters, my precious characters. And should I say that I was left a little bit heartbroken at the end of this because it was kind of bittersweet. Yeah, like I said, heartbroken. I can't elaborate because that would be getting into spoilers, and I can't really describe the plotline for this one. If you guys haven't read Shadow of the Fox, it will be very spoilery. I will just say that this is set in a Japanese-inspired fantasy world, and you're basically following a half kitsune, half human character. In this world, there's this magical scroll. When you chant this prayer during a specific time, every 1,000 years, and you kind of summon like a kami dragon, and this dragon kind of grants any wish to the one person that chants this prayer, and whether it be for good or evil, the dragon grants this wish, and it kind of changes the tide of the world for the next 1,000 years. So it's very much a coin toss to see who uses this prayer in order to tip the balance of the world towards good or to evil. And so it's a very fine line, and everyone wants this scroll, especially when it gets closer to this period of time where you can use this scroll to grant a wish. You're following two main characters. One's this kitsune slash half human character, and the other one is this shinobi that is part of this very elusive clan that's very kind of mysterious and mystical. This magical scroll has been split up into 3 parts, or 4 parts? 3 parts? I forget, but it's been ripped apart. After the previous 1,000 years, civilization wanted to kind of hide away the scroll so it can never be used, but obviously the time is coming for the great kami, and so there's a lot of different factions that are trying to get the pieces of the scroll for their own selfish gain. So the main character ends up having this quest to deliver a part of this magical scroll to another temple to hide it. It's basically kind of like a quest slash journey story. You're basically following these characters as they travel throughout the land. It's very magical and mythical, but at the same time it's also very dark and dangerous, and it just reminded me so much of like anime. I really like that aspect, and after reading Shadow of the Fox, like the first book, I ended up watching like anime shows again. I mean, it's been a minute, like it's been almost a decade since I have moments where I do watch anime, but I used to watch it during high school days, and let me just tell you, like it's been almost a decade since that, so that's showing my age already. But I kind of phased out of like the anime craze. But this series got me back into anime again, and I loved it, which, you know, I'm not complaining about. And also, it's a fun ride. It's a journey story. There's a lot of like Japanese mythological creatures that appear in this book, which most of the time I had to like Google to see what the images look like of these mythical creatures, and it was just wonderful. Like I was inspired by a lot of these magical creatures. Like I wanted to, I don't know, paint and draw these creatures. It was a fun time, and I don't know why not a lot of people are talking about Shadow of the Fox and this series as a whole, because it's such an enjoyable, fun series. If you were trying to get into a fantasy series that had more of an Eastern Asian influence, I'm just saying Shadow of the Fox, well, Night of the Dragon is the third one, but I'm just saying that this series could fill that void. I highly recommend this. I ended up giving Night of the Dragon 3 out of 5 stars, even though it's leaning towards more of a higher 3. I would have liked it if the world was a bit more fleshed out a little bit. It was very action heavy, at least the last book was. It was very, very much action, action, action. There wasn't much of a break between scenes. I feel like every time there was a little bit of rest time for these characters, something else happened, and then something else happened, and so it was very fast-paced, action-heavy, especially towards the end. So if you are looking for something that's very fast-paced, very action-heavy, and has like Eastern Asian influence, this is the book for you. I highly enjoyed this series, but as I said, I wanted the world to be a bit more fleshed out. I wanted this final book to last a bit longer. Like it was very quick, and I kind of wanted time, like characters to have their moments during the slow periods. but yeah, it was just very quick. I didn't have time to react when things went down. It was kind of emotional, very tragic at the end, and very bittersweet. I enjoyed the series as a whole. I highly recommend it. So that is it, guys. These were all the books that I read during the last 4 months of 2020. I know it wasn't like the best stack of books, but I don't know why I've got Misery here. That was not part of it. But yeah, so oh my god. These were the books that I read during the last 4 months of 2020, but I'm glad that all the books that I ended up picking up I somewhat enjoyed. There wasn't any books that I really didn't like, which is always a plus. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you've watched till now, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you guys are staying safe and staying healthy and keep on reading. Bye!